Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis Star Wars. I am Reti 4, this is Greyjedi 91,
Hey guys.
and this is Jensaarai 1.
Houston, we have no problems.
Cue technical problems immediately after the Alucard reference. Today we've got another Jedi and Sith role reversals, and we can finally cover a particular character we've been putting off because we needed Connor here for it. Which are we opening with, guys?
We're starting with our lightsiders, as usual. And so, since you brought up the topic, Qui-Gon Jinn is our Jedi Knight for this episode. And we've been waiting for Connor's presence for this, as he's one of the biggest fans of Jinn that I know. And so take us away, Connor. What would he be like if he started on the dark path?
All right. Well, I just want to preface this with something. This is actually something that you touched on, Matt, when you were discussing Anya Kuro in your last vid, where you were discussing how you thought her dark side alter ego would be essentially a radicalized Jedi. And that just got me thinking that when it comes to deciding what Jedi would be like if they turned to the dark side, you are left with the question, are they a fallen Jedi like Exar Kun, who has rejected Jedi ideology, completely bought into the Sith, and is just a pure cackling maniac? Or are we dealing with someone like Dooku, who's taken Jedi philosophy to an unhealthy extreme and is now, let's enforce peace and justice through fascism? And I do think that Qui-Gon Jinn would be a radicalized Jedi, but in the sense of his higher calling of basically worshiping the Force would still be his guiding character trait. It's just now he'd be a dark side worshiper instead of a light side worshiper. And while I actually think he'd be very, very similar to Darth Malgus, because
I was going to say that so far that's the picture you were painting in my mind, because that's Malgus's whole character motivation.
Same with me. I mean, it's definitely the character that most aligns with that idea. And I think I could definitely see Qui-Gon operating in that style in his own era as well. Obviously, he doesn't immediately have a war on his hands to kind of flourish in, as Malgus did. But I can see his kind of maverick tendencies, shall we say, manifesting in that way, even in peacetime.
Yeah. And the thing is that Qui-Gon on his own, like just looking at him as a Jedi, is a very effective operator who knows how to it's like he's good for covert ops, he's good for operating on his own. So as basically just a covert ops rule of two Sith Lord, he'd be lethal.
It's interesting, though, because that's been one of the staples of our conversation with this, when we put a Jedi onto the dark path. And if they suit the Sith Order at all, what sort of Sith Order most speaks to them? Because the one hang-up I have with him as a rule of two Sith, I agree with you, he'd be effective in terms of his competency. But what would be his motivation? Most of them have strong senses of ambition or what have you. And he's sort of I have a job to do, determination thing. And it's always like this sort of nebulous, as you say, force-given mandate, rather than I need to do this because my master says so, or I need to do this because I just want to, or whatever. I just wonder what would be his motivation if he were dark, do you think?
I think he'd actually be very similar to Darth Bane, because as a rule of two Sith Lord, he would effectively have control over the Sith if he's the Dark Lord, or a huge amount of influence if he is the apprentice, because either way, he is one half of the Sith Order. So I think he'd be very much he'd be a lot like Darth Bane in that it's all about the Sith Order is an expression of the will of the dark side. Our purpose is to propagate the dark side.
Okay. That wouldn't actually have occurred to me, ironically enough, but I 100% agree with you, because that's the reason, to put it very shortly or simply, that is the reason why Bane's my favorite Sith Lord, is because he's about the only one I can think of off the top of my head that I think means it, when he's more concerned with the Sith Order than with himself. And I think Qui-Gon fits that.
Yeah. If anything, it's like a dark side Qui-Gon would almost be the apprentice Bane wanted. Like the perfect apprentice for Darth Bane.
If he were stronger in the Force, definitely.
Well, actually, I think dark side Qui-Gon would be a lot more powerful, because he'd be channeling the dark side. And because one of the big problems with him as a Jedi is that he's got that super passive Obi Kenobi style relationship with the Force where he's perfectly willing to be an instrument of it rather than the other way around. But the problem is that hampers his ability to develop his skill and his power. But as a dark sider, when you're channeling the full elemental destructive power of the dark side, you know,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry,
Colin.
just on that point, because you mentioned Kenobi, his approach to utilizing the light side is at odds with his personal combat style, which I think wouldn't be the case with the dark side, as you say, because Kenobi's passivity lends itself so well to a perfect Ceresu defense, and Qui-Gon is more an offensive stylist. That while his ability and his personal, approach to the Force is admirable and powerful, it doesn't lend itself to that style in combat. With the dark side, do we think it would remain as an almost passive approach, or do we think because his core is driven by the nature of his chosen domain, do you reckon that would shift from sort of the more passive flowing style into the, like you said, the Bane approach, that understanding of the dark side?
Personally, what I was going to say a little bit ago was I don't disagree with what Connor's saying. I think dark side Qui-Gon would be more overtly powerful, I suppose, or she would show that off. But the problem with that is it's not really a problem. It's the only misgiving I have with that is in my head, I don't have a firm picture of how that would manifest, because he's one of the few Jedi that is spoken of as one of the greats of his era who never really got to show it, outside of his academic knowledge or his rediscovery of the ability to survive physical death. So he's definitely going to have it in spades as an academic Force wielder. I'm not sure how it would manifest, but I don't disagree with what you guys are saying. I think he would show off his power more frequently and more overtly. In my head, the cap for like where he would cap out in terms of power is nebulous to me. And I was kind of joking when I shat on him a little while ago. It's just that Darth Bane's so extreme.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see where you're coming from. The restraint that he has as a light side, while it wouldn't be present, if he was on the dark side of the spectrum, it's because of his restraint as a lightsider. It's difficult to see where on the kind of the tier system that we like to employ he would sit as a Force user. It's difficult to place him based, like I said, given the disparity between his accolades and his actual performance.
I feel like if he'd been featured more often, we wouldn't have this impression of him. If he'd been in more books, and I mean, he's in a fair amount of material as it is, but really. It's actually not that much when we actually think about it, Yeah,
not in the grand scheme. And again, when he's not showing off his, combative potential. Right. They're usually, small scale conflicts and such.
Well, the other thing to think is that another little aspect that feeds into him being an ideal rule of two Sith Lord is that the stuff he does with the Force that we do see, all of it is really subtle, subversive applications of the Force. Like, manipulating Watto's die when he tries to, that whole thing in episode 1. And it seems to me that as a rule of two Sith Lord, he'd be one of those guys who's using the Force in a very subversive, clever manner to instigate chaos. It'd almost be like a dark side Obi-Wan, like the way Obi-Wan crushed those 3 Magna Guards with the shipping container in Revenge of the Sith. I see Qui-Gon doing a lot of stuff like that as a dark sider. It's just, with him, it'd be more in the sense of, I am an agent of chaos.
Kind of.
I can see that, because those are feats I think are in his capabilities as is. I get that. It was just like, again, in my head, the only reason I jokingly said that, semi-jokingly, is because the comparison between him and the way Bane uses the Force is like, a little skewed.
Well, he definitely doesn't seem to be as powerful as the likes that Bane would be drawn to, on initial approach. But do you reckon he's the type of person that Bane would favour in terms of effort of drawing it out to its maximum potential? Like, I feel like Bane could be a very good influence on Darkside Jinn as a user.
I think it would be a make or break thing in their relationship. If Bane was going to take this guy as his apprentice, and he wouldn't do it unless he saw that potential down the road. He just wouldn't do it.
And do you reckon if he went for the gamble that the potential would be realised, do you reckon he'd have to cut that relationship short?
That's what I mean. I have no idea. I'm open to either, because Qui-Gon is one of those. He's spoken of in a way that I could certainly see him being powerful enough that he's, like sort of him living up to that legend. But I just don't have a firm mental picture, because he elected not to display that side of his ability so frequently. like to the point that it's part of his character almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So motive, then, we've kind of drawn back to basically driving the dark side, rather than...
I thought he kind of covered that.
Yeah,
like that when he mentioned that him being sort of like a servant of the dark side, a servant of the Force.
Absolutely.
The way Malgus.
Absolutely, but we spoke about how that reflects on his approach and connection to the rule of two Sith. While they definitely are servants of the dark side, particularly as you said, Bane is the kind of iconic example of that. How do you reckon that would kind of plug into his approach as Bane's apprentice in a situation? Because he's very anti-order, Sith order for Sith order's sake. It would be about the Force for him. So do you reckon his motive would his appreciation of the dark side of things drive that and move him away from the kind of maverick nature?
I don't see him as an anarchist, though. So it's more like he's
not
just
that level. Just the fact that he does oppose. If he disagrees with Bane on any part of the Sith Order's kind of nature, he will go with that if it's holding to character. So how do you reckon that would work? Do you reckon there'd be a point of conflict there, or would it work out?
I think it could be. What you're saying makes sense, but the thing is, like Connor mentioned, I think that the two of them would be pretty much in step, that they wouldn't have too many issues where that would fallings out like that would occur.
Okay, sorry, I was just curious. To know the answer there. What you guys thought of that was all.
Yeah.
Because I definitely agree that they would be very much in line and very much in tone, and Bane would take a liking to Jinn as a Darksider, obviously. I just wasn't sure whether or not that would the Maverickism, if that's a word, which is not, would be an issue.
The thing is, Qui-Gon's outspoken. I don't really. He's spoken of as defiant, but I don't really see that so much in him, so much as he's just not going to do something without thinking about it for himself. I don't really consider that defiance, even though the Jedi Council does.
True.
Yeah. He's not going out and subverting the Jedi Council's authority. He's not telling other knights to ignore them. He's just not listening when it suits him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, in some ways, I think that because he's a fairly popular character from one of the least popular movies, and I think that aspect of him is what people gravitate toward, where his character is concerned.
And I think that as far as disagreements with Bane about the direction of the Sith would go, I don't think that these would cause conflict, because he would air those grievances with Bane, and Bane would listen. They would have a dialogue, and they'd come to some sort of consensus. And the other thing is that because of the way the rule of two Sith Order is set up with only two members at any one time, well, Qui-Gon wouldn't really be a maverick. He'd be an individual.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So that's what I mean. He wouldn't be kind of roiling against the chains of Bane's kind of rule. It would be a case of bringing his own arguments to the partnership and how that would interact with Bane. Because I agree. I think there would be a dialogue there. Bane might have to slap him down on occasion, but I think it would be more a case of them both developing the nature of the Sith moving forward together, rather than direct opposition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, this is what would happen if Qui-Gon Jinn were Bane's apprentice. So we are kind of knocking him back 1,000 years, whereas the Sith Lord during Qui-Gon's time frame was, Tenebrous and Plagueis. And in that case, I think he would have some serious issues with Tenebrous and Plagueis, depending on who he got recruited by, because, well, both of these guys are hardcore Sith scientists who are all about their own will ahead of the will of the dark side.
Absolutely.
I can see that, and that's actually why I initially questioned it when you pegged him as a fit for the rule of two. I'm going, his personality though, like how would he make it through that? But when you mentioned Bane, I go, okay, if you slotted him with someone like Bane, that makes sense. Otherwise, there is a clash, definitely.
Yeah,
going with the way of the dark side
Plagueis,
rather than kind of trying to throw a mantle over it and claim it as your own and tame it, as it were.
Yeah, it's like as Plagueis' apprentice, I see a lot of smiling and nodding, but then the second he kills Plagueis, he just have a rant about how the dark side is holy.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Nothing would piss Plagueis off more than that, I don't think.
But yeah, any final closing thoughts on Jinn then, or are we going to move on to the next?
I think that was not from me anyway. That was one of the more interesting ones we've had, though. Very interesting character.
It's his philosophy does carry over well to the dark side, and there are other Sith Lords that we can draw comparisons to, Bane and Malgus being the big ones. And I do think that he probably would be much more powerful as a Darksider because, well, the dark side encourages you to channel its power with maximum intensity and unleash hell upon your opponents, and that would play into his skill set a bit more effectively. He'd be a much different beast. In fact, I think that it is possible, like not guaranteed, but possible, that he, as a Darksider, he could achieve a level of power comparable to Malgus and Bane.
Like I said,
Yeah,
because of the way he's spoken of, I'm open to that. I just
he just needs some development on that line. He's an interesting character to cover here, though, for this topic, because unlike so many other characters that would be switching sides, his kind of defining traits are more integrally kind of connected to his appreciation and connection with the Force. So many other Jedi that we've switched over have characteristics that you could almost take the Force away from them, and they would still, have defining traits attached. Whereas with Jinn, he's so connected to his kind of appreciation of and understanding of the light that just switching the light to the dark side, it doesn't really change. He's more malleable on that kind of personal level and how we can discuss him.
That's sort of the through line between those three, though. Bane, Malgus, and Qui-Gon, is that they're more defined by that than any kind of outlying factors or personal ambitions.
Yeah, they're so tied to their nature as Force users. It's very interesting.
It's the sort of thing where it's like they're probably the most admirable Sith Lords in how they champion the philosophy, but they're also very much outliers who really don't get along well with the rest of the Sith Order, because it's like, well, both Malgus and Bane betrayed the Sith of their time because they weren't in line with them. And I think if Qui-Gon were the apprentice to either Tenebrous or Plagueis, he'd do the same thing.
They're very forthright and earnest in their devotion to the dark side, where other Sith are more. It's more just a tool for them,
Me.
Yeah, it's a tool to whatever success they want.
Yeah, those are the kind of Sith that I enjoy as characters. Even though I would never want to be a Sith, like I can come close to putting myself in a place where I can sympathize with characters like that. Your Warlocks and your Malguses and Banes and so forth. The people that put some kind of higher ideal other than just themselves and their own escalation ahead of them. That's very rare.
It is very rare with the Sith.
But yeah, so are we moving on to the next character on our list?
That one now, yeah.
Okay, so the next one was possibly the most popular request for a single Jedi that I saw throughout the comments on our previous episodes of this, and that would be Kukruk.
It's an odd choice for a favourite, in my opinion. I'm surprised so many people are interested in this particular example. Not because it's not interesting, but just because I would have thought so many more would come to mind first. But I'm glad that he has been selected. He's a very patient creature, which would be interesting to see how he turns, or how that manifests on the dark side of things. How he would be a very lie in wait, lay the plans at the feet of his opponents, and see how things develop before pouncing on them, if you ask me. As for his motivation, that's a bit more difficult to pin.
Actually, for me, his motivation as a Darksider is very easy for me to conclude, because it's discussed that as a Jedi, the one tenet of the Jedi Code that Kukruk has the greatest problem with is there is no death, there is only the Force. He's got a huge problem dealing with mortality. And I think that as a Darksider, he would probably be consumed by a crippling fear of death. And that would be his driving impetus. He would probably desire immortality.
Okay.
See, that I think you're onto something, but I think it's similar to Anakin in that what really bothers him is the loss of others. So he would want to, but I mean, that's weird. I don't know if it would manifest that way if he started on the dark path. Yeah, so you could be right. But yeah, I mean, he definitely, it's like Anakin and Padme. Like, he has a hard time losing people as disposable as clone troopers. That hurts him. That's part of like what and the way his master, 2Cs, was killed and all that. So yeah, I mean, it's in the source material, it's linked to a want to preserve those he's close to, much like Anakin. But if he started as a Sith Lord, I suppose it could manifest that way, as wanting to just become immortal for fear of. I hate that, because that would push. He's one of my favorite Jedi characters, and that would push him down the Anderu route, who I have no time for whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't see it as though he couldn't have the same concern for others around him. It would probably be a bit more possessive and more selfish in nature than selfless. But I can see that manifesting there as well.
it depends what kind of era or Sith Order he's in. Like there are in like the Old Republic era, there are Sith Lords who are more human, for want of a better term, than what you typically think of. They have families, and he's one of those characters that to me it would depend what kind of Sith Order he was a part of, because there are characters in the Old Republic era, Sith characters, I mean, that are more human, for want of a better term, than we typically think of that as. They have families. There's a lot of authoritarian hierarchy involved. There's a lot of I'll cut my losses, or you're my family, but duty calls ahead of you. But if he came up in a system like that, I could see him preserving that, wanting to have those abilities to keep those who he cares about, or at the very least useful, safe and around, I suppose.
But not so in the Rule of Two era. So like he would be more
I don't
of
think
a...
I don't think he would function in the Rule of Two personally.
The funny thing is, I actually think he would, because the Rule of Two Sith Lord active during K'Krukk's time frame, especially like pre-Phantom Menace, was Darth Plagueis, and I do think that K'Kruk, with a common fear of death and a common desire for immortality, would actually fit in quite well with Plagueis. The two of them would have a lot of common ground in that respect.
That's dependent on that. Dependent on that as his motivation, though. Like, it would have to be the specific Sith Lord of that era of Sith that has that kind of core drive for immortality. Anyone else, I'm not sure how that would work in terms of his mindset.
I'm not sure how useful K'Kruk would be to Plagueis, though. So I don't know if Plagueis would entertain that.
Yeah, because the thing is that K'Kruk, it's like, he's definitely a bloody powerful force wielder and a really good combatant, but he doesn't really have much potential as a political operator, because he's a Wifid. The sad thing is that the Star Wars universe is very much defined by racial prejudices, and Wifids aren't the sort of people that you shortlist for. They're not on the short list for Supreme Chancellor. It's like if he were attached to Plagueis,
Yeah, I also get the impression he doesn't have himself much time for that kind of an arena as well. Sidious reveled and shined in that kind of field. He definitely wouldn't even avoid it, separate of him being a Wipid.
To me, I think I don't know if you were getting at this as well, Callan, but to me, K'Kruk is not somebody who wants to be in charge. I mean, he'll do his duty, he'll rise to the occasion, but he doesn't crave power at all. And even when he kind of becomes Grand Master, it sort of falls to him to do that. Like he's just sort of like the last one left in the position to do that. Yeah. And he seems even sort of gruff and I don't have much time for politics, even then, and even when it's his job. Like at that point in time, the Jedi Grand Master sits on a triumvirate in charge of ruling. I mean, he wouldn't want to do it though.
Yeah, it comes down to him doing it because A, like you said, it's his duty, and B, he cares about those, his charges, those beneath him. I mean, he's the one who kind of brings those Jedi up in the era, separate from everything else going on in the galaxy. He's the one who will separate himself from the world at large to do what he needs to do or what he wants to do personally. And that to me, that kind of mentality, outside of very specific circumstances, doesn't lend itself to the dark side. He would have to have a specific reason or driving reason that would very specific put him into a very specific niche in the dark side of things to kind of shine. Otherwise, he just kind of end up being middling.
I'd make him. I think he would fit much better in a functioning, sprawling Sith Empire than Rule of Two personally. But that's just my take on him. I could see him being like, maybe not the head of an academy, but like an instructor there. You know what I mean? In charge of a specific group of force study, or whipping academy students into line, but not necessarily overly cruelly. Just doing his job efficiently. Showing
people how to survive after being hit by a lightsaber and going into hibernative state. That can be his niche. But for the dark side. Yeah, any further thoughts?
That's a scary thought though, about like a Sith that could do that. It was just that tough. Unless you're really one of the you know, heavy hitters of the era, you don't really want to tangle with a dark side whippet like that. I don't think.
No, absolutely not.
It'd be best if you were strong enough or powerful enough to not have to engage him physically at all. You know, if if you were like a Palpatine. Otherwise, you could be in trouble.
He'd be very much like that Sith archaeologist voiced by Neelix from KOTOR 1.
That guy, he's the least Sithly Sith ever, by the way.
I know, and that's actually why I really like that character. He's just a side character who's voiced by Neelix, but
what is that guy's real name? I don't know.
even know.
Okay, good, it's not just me.
He's just I guess he's just Sith Neelix, but in a way
Neelix.
he really shows the more human side of the Sith. He shows that it is totally possible to follow Sith ideology and be a Sith without being a cackling maniac who wants to conquer the galaxy. This guy just wants to be an archaeologist because that's what he likes doing. And it's like that's
what I mean. That's the kind of environment you got to have a Sith like that in, because they don't work in rule of two systems.
Oh no, they don't. It's like as a rule of two Sith Lord, I actually think that Kakruk would just end up being a third wheel like Darth Maul. He's just there as a martial enforcer who's being strung along, told he's a Sith Lord, but isn't actually.
I think the voice actor is Ethan Phillips, by the way.
Is that his name?
Not certain.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the first thing that came up as
I know what the actor's name is. I just want to say Neelix because.
I said that's what I was asking. I was like, what is that guy's name? The actor's name? You know, I didn't know the character's name. But yeah. Anyway, so is that Kakruk covered or any other points?
I haven't got anything else to say about it. He's just one of those characters that doesn't really stand out in any particular way that would lend him to a dark side story.
He was the ultimate. He was one of those Hufflepuff Jedi where he just he didn't achieve high status on purpose. He was just consistent, measured, and knew how to not get killed. And suddenly he's the most powerful surviving Jedi.
That's
he's also he's a hard worker, and he's also a good finder, whatever that means.
Yeah, no,
anyway,
I can buy that. Hufflepuff is the best term for it, I think.
Yeah. So we're moving on now to our final light side character, who sort of exists in the dark already. That would be Jedi Master, Spy Master, Thome.
Very much akin to Anya Kuro in terms of his role as a Sith Lord, I think. He would be one of those operating in the shadows, an elusive man kind of situations, with motivation that could really be anything depending on the era and the world he was placed in.
For me, you put this guy in charge of Sith intelligence and just let him run his show. I mean, don't get in the way. Just appreciate him for being the asset that he is, and I think he's honor bound and duty bound enough, even on the dark, to just do his duty in service to the Empire or whatever. And he won't turn against you as long as you're not doing anything stupid.
Yeah, and he would be the absolute person who would keep an eye on you as well. Even if you're his superior, he'll be making sure you don't slip up. Oh, you're not working for the Empire. Okay, pawn, move here, and then you're dead. You don't want to cross him at all.
He'd be very, very similar to Hazen, actually. Like, that's my impression of him.
Yeah, but sane and stable.
Yeah, sane. Yeah. Well,
a better Hazen, like for all intents and purposes, because Hazen's damaged and crazy. Thome's not.
Yeah. But still, that's sort of where he's not the most powerful player on the field, and he knows it, but he's ridiculously cunning, and for that reason, it's almost impossible to get the better of him. Because it's like, even if you waltz into his chambers, draw your lightsaber, and say, fuck you, I'm more powerful, suddenly he just vanishes. It's like, oh, shit.
Yeah, he would be, okay, you want me to play a game I'm guaranteed to lose, I'm not playing. Like, that's ridiculous. I mean, he's that kind of character. And you said he's not the most powerful, but he is the kind of person like an Anya Kuro who would wield much more influence than just pure power. easily, very easily.
He leverages his strengths with ease in pretty much any arena you put him in, and the arena he's going to be aiming for is his, ultimate specialist role of being this kind of intelligence officer. He will. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how he instructs as well, because I feel like he would be the type to take on many students, if for no other reason than to kind of build his asset list up. He would spread his agents spread out throughout the Empire would be very, by design, be very loyal, I think, and that would give him a lot of power that most other Sith can't really dream of, because they always have to worry about that paranoia aspect.
He'd have to be like Kreia in that he's very good at reading who he's working with, knowing that he can trust them, or even capitalize on like the mistakes they're guaranteed to make. Like he's got to be that kind of person who would always be on his toes, and not somebody who knows how to play the Game of Thrones well, just to put it simply.
He'd be Varys.
a Littlefinger or Varys, yeah, depending on the circumstance.
Because neither of those two are going to like take to the battlefield and crush you, or use their immense wealth to sink you, but they know how to play you. Like you become their tool.
Yep.
And unless you're really shrewd, you're not going to notice that until it's too late.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I do get the impression that if you go out of your way to make yourself useful to Dark Lord Thome and, do his bidding and, be a good, effective servant, he will take care of you. He won't cast you aside unless it's absolutely necessary, because you're useful to him, and he's a craftsman who values his tools.
Absolutely. He's the guy everyone on the council is trying to get in their corner, and knowing him, he'd probably be in all of their corners simultaneously, working to play to whoever seems to have the highest advantage.
And unlike certain characters that we might be thinking of, there would be like a genuine sense of, I hesitate to use the word camaraderie, but that's what comes, or maybe loyalty. Like it wouldn't all be based on fear. Like there would be a mutual respect there.
Yeah, he'd be, in my eyes, he'd be trying to balance the table. So he would be trying to keep the council in control, controlled, and not constantly backstabbing each other, making sure certain assets are here, certain leverages are there, to mean that every time they try and plot and overthrow one another, he kind of keeps the scales roughly balanced, and for the Emperor almost, or for the Empire as a whole. He'd be a stabilizing influence on the council, I think, and that would be where his his focus and his drive and his motivation comes from.
Yeah, if for no other reason than because he's reasonable, unless you're an unreasonable individual, you don't have like an inbuilt enemy in him,
Just don't fuck up and don't oppose the Empire.
Don't fuck up, don't oppose the Empire, and stay the hell out of his way.
Yeah. And don't try to involve him in any pettiness that you're trying to run. Like if you used him, like that's bad.
Yeah.
Move. It's like he's the sort of guy where you phone him up and say, "Hey, Spymaster Thome, I'm going to be moving ahead with this scheme against this individual, and all I ask is, please don't interfere. I don't want to cause any problems for you. Please, pursue no vendettas, and I shall pursue none."
Yeah, and heaven help you if your personal vendetta is going to impede the council or the Empire as a whole as a result. You have to make sure that you've just tipping it just a gentle amount, and just a little bit beneath his notice or beneath his care, or you're going to immediately find your plot unraveling.
Yep.
But yeah, that's Thome. I don't think there's too much more we can say about with him.
He'd be interesting because as a Darksider, I do think he's exactly as a light side Jedi who dabbles in the dark. I think as a dark side Sith, he would be dabbling in the light. Like, if for no other reason than just practical concerns, because Jedi healing meditations are proven effective.
Yeah, I can see that. He's interesting because his Force abilities themselves, I don't think would change too much. The scale, because of the nature of his personality, the dark side wouldn't work for him any better than the light. If you know what I mean, it wouldn't be a massive shift on that level.
He'd have Force.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, it's all right. Just finish. We're in one of those things.
He'd have Force lightning. That's about it.
I can see that.
I mean, the term dark doesn't need to equate to evil, and I think that applies to him.
Absolutely, I completely agree on that one.
It's just that his motivations would be different, but his methodology, for all intents and purposes, would be the same, and that's sort of rare, when we do these discussions for that to be the case.
Yeah. He's the sort of person where, as a Darksider, he would just be he'd have too much self-control to be evil. Because he knows that being full-on evil just isn't practical. It's not a good operating procedure to alienate people and make enemies. It makes way more sense to be diplomatic and make friends.
Yeah. So that's the light side is dealt with. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. We're moving on to our Darksiders now. So for our Sith warrior, the most popular request that was in the comment section was Darth Sion. So that's what we're going with. What do we think about a light side Darth Sion?
Okay. To me, Darth Sion's defining character trait was essentially his crazy will to live. So it's like that's basically what his ability to stay alive was based on, at least until the Jedi exile came along and said, hey, your life kind of sucks. Why do you want to keep going on living? And he's just like, okay, yeah, fair point, blah. But as a light sider, I think the will to live, it wouldn't be a fear of death. It would be more like a refusal to give up, a refusal to back down, a refusal to submit.
Yeah, was he... I haven't played that section of the game in a while. Was he one of those that was afraid of death, or was he just so determined to get his vengeance that he wouldn't let himself die? More like in the vein of what they did with Darth Maul, or was he just afraid of death? I'm not sure which one it was.
I think he was mostly just dedicated to gaining his vengeance and achieving power. It was kind of like his ambition as a Sith Lord was his driving impetus.
Yeah, if that's the case, then he's definitely going to be somebody who's governed more by determination than just, even as a Sith, there's more commonality between him and just the extremely determined than the Sith equivalents of Voldemort, like Plagueis, who are just afraid of death.
I can't die yet.
Yeah.
I still have work to be done. There's too much to do.
Yeah.
I can't end now. We've got to go on. More people need help. More work needs doing. Stop. I can't die yet. It would just be a kind of a persisting.
This is not how Batman dies.
Just had a kind of a persisting nature to him that kind of keeps him not ageless, but certainly not facing age in the same way every Jedi does. It would be interesting to see how he would cope with injury as well, because obviously we know he's grievously, mortally, fatally wounded and held alive by his determination alone. Whether or not that would manifest as more as a regenerative property for the light side, or whether or not it would just be the same kind of holding him together.
I think what he actually is one of those, how Palpatine goes on that some would consider to be unnatural things, I don't think he could directly exercise a light expression of the Force to become what he is. I think he would be one of those characters that kind of like what's his name, Arcan, of the two twins, somebody who's been patched together, a bunch, like he's survived a bunch of grievous wounds, and he's used the Force to sustain his life force. But I don't think he would be like a Jedi Frankenstein. I think he'd be patched together. He'd be like a Jedi pirate, basically. And insane pain tolerance, but I don't think he could actually be holding himself together with the Force, if you get what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah. He'd basically just be keeping himself alive. So I do think he'd probably have some god-tier mastery of Force heal that gives him a certain degree of regeneration and would probably make him extremely not long-lived. I don't think he'd be a true immortal as a Jedi, because I don't think he'd desire that or be willing to embrace it. But I do think he'd be the sort of guy where it's like, okay, I need to keep myself alive and maintain my physical prime for another few decades longer because I have to complete my work as a Jedi. And because of that intense determination, I think that as a Jedi, he'd be one of the guys he'd be a Jedi with a plan. Like, there would be things he wants to do, like changes to the order that he would want to enact, or reforms within the Republic that he would want to push. He wouldn't just be...
Yeah, I'm not sure what those would be, but he would definitely be a very austere guy, and like in terms of personality, and he'd definitely be very duty bound and like I have a job to do for sure.
And there's always more work. You can never just sit down and, okay, I'm done. One of those types.
Yeah, I don't know what his motivations could be.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of those changes that he would want to make to the Republic or the Order. How that would sort of take form.
I mean, he's one of those characters that he would fall into his role naturally if there was a war going on. But in peacetime, I don't know what he would do with his time. I don't know if he would view himself as necessary in such an era.
Mayhaps it would be something to do with instructing the Jedi in terms of warrior caste type thing. Building up their ability to go to war should it be necessary. We must be ready for war at all times, no matter how. We can't become complacent in peace. Maybe that would be his drive.
He'd be the guy. He'd be the guy who maintained the infrastructure and made sure it was always there and ready to go into action should it be needed. Like, he'd be the guy who would make sure that the Jedi Order didn't turn into the prequel era Jedi, which, asleep at the wheel, kind of complacent. He'd be the guy just kind of going through there being like, no, be alert, eyes open, pay attention to the galaxy, what's going on around us.
Yeah, so he's basically a Crinda Dre then, like somebody who's seen the shit, like the worst that the galaxy has to offer and let them change him. Not necessarily for the worse, but he'd definitely be... You don't do that unless you've lived like, through some kind of trauma. You're just not that's not gonna manifest in that way.
It would fall in line with his wounds as well. It could be something as simple as he goes on a mission. His allies aren't as capable as him, and he in trying to save them more, or trying to save whatever mission objective they have, that's what gets him injured. And he's like, never again. We're gonna be ready next time, and I'm not gonna have these complacent allies by my side.
He would be ridiculously. There's a lot of commonality with Ram Kota there. I actually think he'd be very much in that same vein. He'd be a militant Jedi.
So I definitely get the impression that Kota would be the militant style, even in peacetime as well. We don't know that for sure about him, but I definitely think that's likely.
Actually, we do know that for sure about him. Ram Kota's backstory is discussed in the databank for The Force Unleashed 1, like a little thing you can unlock as you play the game and you read it. It's discussed that pre-Order 66, pre-Clone Wars, he was actually very militant. He was calling for the Jedi Order to take a more active role in, policing the galaxy, as well as a more active role in galactic politics.
I did not know that about him. My mistake.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yes, definitely one of those types then. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. If anything, he'd be almost like, I consider Ram Kota himself to be about on the level with Luminara Unduli, whereas I think Sion as a Kota, he'd be like, what if Ram Kota was actually Council Master level? Because I do think that as a Jedi, he would reach that level of power. He does have that kind of insane determination. It's like, come on, he is one of the all-time great Sith Lords.
Oh, absolutely. His power is already very, very high just by potential alone, but the type of person who is that determined and that focused on trying to drive the Order forward would not be building up his power on a more practical level as well. He's going to be the Mace Windu who's also honing his skill day in, day out, for sure. Is there anything else we can say about him? Yeah, are we missing any? Well, I guess the usual questions don't apply because this is the light side version. So yeah, anything else?
Yeah. No, I agree with all that. I think he would be like sort of a mesh of those characters that you guys have mentioned, just with some baggage. Like I said, I think he would have been twisted into that. I don't think he would just be that way. I don't think he would have the most healthy mind on the Jedi Council, even though he's of their level. I think that he would have been colored by a grim past. Is all.
It'd be a little bit like Ki-Adi-Mundi, who on the one hand is the calm Jedi, but then in interrogation, he's using Jedi mind powers and going all Jack Bauer on the poor fucker.
Yeah, he's a little controversial, yeah. But not without his reasons at the same time. So yeah, that's an interesting parallel there.
If anything, it's like he'd be almost exactly like Ram Kota, because Kota's backstory is that he spent he was a child soldier on his war-torn homeworld. It's like, it's...
Yeah, it's definitely that's the kind of thing that would produce what we're talking about. It's somebody who's been, who's already had their life blown apart once is what would make somebody like that.
Who's seen the price of complacency and never wants it to happen again, basically.
Right. Yeah. Which makes sense, if that's what Ram Koda was, because he would have come up during peacetime relative to like what the Clone Wars brought, and yet that he was already formed in that sense because of that uncommon past.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But so that is Darth Sion then. So are we moving on to our next one, or any other
I've got
thoughts?
nothing else to say on that.
Okay. So I guess we just as a little bit of backstory, we explained that. So the next one is basically our. I don't know if you guys, talking to the audience now, have noticed, but we have like a loose framework where we try to pick a warrior and a consular type, and then the in-between sentinel type for our characters, light and dark. And when it came to discussing our sorcerer, inquisitor, whatever you want to call it, entry, we came up with nothing but just vicious, sadistic assholes, like that we couldn't fathom what they would be like on the light side. So we instead settled on Darth Malady. More of a Sith scientist than a sorceress, but at the same time, she was more subdued and easily transferable to the light than your King Almonds and so forth. So Darth Malady is who we're discussing next.
She's definitely one of the ilk that would be placed somewhere between Warlock and Plagueis as a Jedi for me. She would be the kind of studious laboratory type that is working on some sort of project for some sort of reason in the Order, less of the militant going out on missions type for me, in my mind anyway. Very, very
she
focused
is that
on some
the Sith,
work.
and she's already like that on the Sith, so she would definitely not be out in the field very often. Capable of doing that, but that's just not where she would serve best. I think that they would agree,
Yeah, she'd be enhancing kind of the medical facility in the temple and working on new cures for big diseases and plague problems, or even if it's just on the agricultural side. That would be her focus. Or
actually, that makes sense though. Like she doesn't need to do that internally. She could go around as that could be her field operations. Assisting, citizens of the galaxy who need help doing that kind of stuff, helping them establish new laboratories and whatnot.
She strikes me as someone who would actually be put in charge of one of the Jedi Service Corps facilities, like the actual Jedi Knight who's here managing operations while all of the poor-ass Jedi washouts do all the work.
Yeah, no, I can see her being that type, having always having some new set project that she's working on and trying to enhance the galaxy somewhere. Even on the more mundane levels, dealing with like better crop management and here's this new slight refinement to Bacta, treatment. Just always thinking, that's a good idea. We can try that, and then working into how basically, as you said, Matt, this Malady from the Sith just turned to the instead of making weapons of mass destruction, she's just trying to fix and make cures the more mundane problems of the galaxy.
I think that I think she could serve those roles that you guys are saying. I wouldn't want her to be wasted doing that. I would want her to be sharing her knowledge with the wider galaxy than just the Jedi.
That's what I mean. Applying them definitely in principle, not just in research.
If anything, she'd actually be the Jedi who's making a point of attending all of the big academic conferences. She'd be the Jedi representative, the one who shows up as one of these people to talk with them.
If you think about the fact that just the fact that basically Krait's entire plan from like the start wouldn't have been viable without her innovations, like she is a genius, like I don't use that word lightly. Like in terms of her understanding of biology, that's too general, or that's almost too specific. Her knowledge is vast, and she's not just a good student; she's a great innovator.
Definitely the type that will excel in any field you put her in, as long as she's got the interest for it. It's not going to be a case of like, you focus specifically on medical research. Like, no, but there's some innovation over there that I want to focus on. That someone's not looking at this problem on the agricultural side or the technical side. There's a lot for her to work on. And she would, I think, be very driven in that as well. She's got that kind of passion for the sciences.
She'd actually probably end up becoming one of the Jedi Order's big department heads.
That's what I mean, like running the projects and coming up with different plans and schemes for how this kind of part of the Order is gonna handle different problems.
Yeah. She'd be one of the Jedi who would probably be on the short list for becoming a council master, but she would probably turn it down because she's not concerned with administration. All she cares about is the work itself. So it's like she's a department head administrating her department because that's how she does her work. But she wouldn't be concerned with the wider Jedi Order.
That, or she'd have a short-term seat for sure. Yeah, she wouldn't be someone who sits, aims to be there and stay there. She would be, like I say, working on things.
She's too busy. Yeah.
My work is too important to be worried about council, sitting on the council and managing mundane matters.
And when I say that, when I say too busy, it's like I said, she's such a genius and innovator that it's like, okay, I can't just delegate this to one of my people below me. I need to be there to do it because it's not going to get done without me. She's that kind of, she's that level of genius.
Okay. This has just got me thinking that if Lightside Malady had an encounter with Jocasta Nu, it's like, if an item does not exist on our records, it does not exist. Smack. Shut up, bitch. I create new shit all the time.
Yeah, and stop being so arrogant and single-minded. There's innovation to be had here. Constantly working.
I swear, when people say that they don't like the Jedi, that's who they're thinking of subconsciously, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
But how, in terms of the light side, force-wise, how do you reckon that would have? I mean, obviously the easy answer is saying, healing abilities and maybe plant manipulation, that kind of sort of esoteric style. But I don't think that she would be particularly powerful in the light side. I think she would be more. It would be more focused on the. Yeah, like you said, the cerebral internal.
I think
genius.
that what she would have is she would have a ridiculously advanced level of ability with sense-based powers, because so much of her work would be based around trying to perceive the molecular structure of this and that with the Force to really understand things. So it's
intellectual augmentation, basically. That kind of thing, rather than manipulating the environment of the world around her to any great extent.
Yeah.
It depends what you mean by when you say you don't think she would be particularly powerful.
Yeah, I mean in terms of exerted influence, not like actual level in the Force, sorry, to be specific.
Yeah. I think she'd be a ridiculously powerful practitioner of sense abilities to the point where she's like 2 steps away from omniscient. But in terms of actual practical abilities, she'd be baseline, and she'd know it, and she'd admit it.
Well, see, I think she's got better than baseline telekinesis in terms of the way she uses it. She just uses it little, but she's capable of penetrating the defenses of powerful individuals. And I think that she would. She uses a particularly dark application of illusions, but that facility with that ability, I think that she would be able to apply that using the light side as well. She has the potential to become an illusionist. She's a mental, sort of force wielder.
Yeah, she's very Scalpel-esque as well in terms of how she applies herself for, in terms of telekinesis and such. I think that would definitely carry over to the light side. But it would be so outside of her area of interest, it would to put her in a role where she would be using that to its maximum ability. It would be a bottleneck. That would be a poor selection. You said before, Matt, how you like to think about what Jedi is going to be the solution to this problem. Who will I send to take out this opponent? She's never going to be on that list because she's going to be off doing the large scale kind of science projects.
No, I just want to make it clear that I thought if she found herself in a position where she had to throw down, I think that she does have some things going for her.
Absolutely.
Even if they're primarily misdirectional or defensive or sense oriented, they would be powerful applications of those powers.
I think you would also get a lot of the more obscure abilities like Moritro, like bits where it's like you're using the Force to influence someone else's bodily functions and nervous system. I think she'd probably be an expert with powers like that, probably because she'd be innovating the use of those abilities for medical treatments. It's like, oh my God, you're having a heart attack.
I mean, that's very true. She is a physician. She's a Sith doctor, so I mean,
She's Darth Crate's personal physician.
Yeah, no, she's definitely going to be that level of intellect in the medical field, as with every field that she applies to scientifically, and that's going to manifest in her Force abilities for sure. Like you said, you're having a heart attack here. Let me stop that with the Force till I can get a permanent solution in.
I think that with Malady, medical science would be her core focus of her skill set and and academic knowledge. But she would also be very well versed in all of the things connected to that, like cybernetics or obscure viruses. hell, even bioweapons. I think she probably would make a point of familiarizing herself with known bioweapons and developing countermeasures.
Know the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else for Malady, or are we going to move on to the final candidate?
She'd be
I'm
very...
fine with moving on. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
It's like Malady would pretty much be almost the exact same character as a light sider that she is as a Sith. She'd be duty-bound, dedicated to upholding the Order itself. She wouldn't have much personal ambition. It would basically be she's married to her work, and it wouldn't change.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with
likewise.
that.
It would just shift.
The only thing that would change for us is that we'd probably be able to relate to her a little bit better because, she wouldn't be a bloodthirsty Sith. But anyway,
I think the big thing is that as Darth Malady, her big motivation is is on some level a thirst for knowledge. Like, whereas as a Jedi, it would be more so knowledge as a means to an end, that end being the betterment of the galaxy.
Yeah, a need for knowledge rather than a personal thirst. It's we need to know this, so let's learn and know it.
Yes. So
I agree with that. So we'll move on to our final character, which is our assassin stand-in. Like, she's not technically a Sith, but she's a dark Jedi / bounty hunter, so that screams assassin to me. And we covered her master in the prior episode on Yakiro. So this is Aurra Sing. How do we feel she would manifest if she'd stayed on the path of light?
I think she'd become somewhere between Dark Woman Light and Quinlan Voss. I don't think she would have the same force focus as Anya Kuro. She would shift her focus over to the practical assassination techniques and alternative weapons that she mastered as an ex-Jedi bounty hunter. But it's just in her case, it would be more so familiarizing herself with the techniques of the enemies of the Jedi and learning how to use them against her. Have any of you guys read Coruscant Knights, the Coruscant Knights trilogy?
It's been too long, but yeah.
Well, the Jedi Paladins. Aurra Sing would have become a Jedi Paladin.
I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can get behind that
and
as well.
that's also the kind of environment one would associate with her.
Yeah.
She needs to be put to work on a practical, immediate problem. She's not someone who's going to be thriving in an environment where she has to personally choose where to sort of spend her energies. I think she needs to be sent somewhere to do something. If you want, that's almost partly what would keep her on the light in the first place, even if we didn't change her personality.
Yeah, the way that you're phrasing it is also like she wouldn't need to be sent. Like, I'm not challenging you on that, but she would just jump at the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Though she needs. I meant more like she needs something to do rather than she needs to be told. She's not going to be someone you can just leave to do generic stuff.
The council could be mid-briefing about, so here's the situation, and she's already at the door. She's already on her way over there.
I already packed. Definitely.
Yep.
She's the active type. The question is how much of her personality I think would need to shift, because one of the key reasons for her falling was the trauma of her treatment under her master, but also her own personal kind of
demons.
Yeah, her not mental instability, but her emotional difficulties.
I think no
she
matter
would never.
what.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think no matter what, as a Jedi, she would be extremely driven. It would be going back to what we were discussing with Darth Sion, another one of those Ram Koda style, not militant Jedi, but still very driven and determined because of what happened in her past. Her mother was a freaking junkie.
Yeah. And she's, late enough to the order, that I could see that being something she remembered. Or was she? Am I misremembering that? Was she an infant? I thought she was a little older.
I thought she was older. Because that's why she was given to Kuro. She was a troubled, difficult student, wasn't she?
That's right. Yeah, but I just couldn't remember if she was taken as an infant or not. Like from.
I think she was an infant,
young adult. Oh, well, rather young teen, rather.
There's a picture of her together with Anya Kiro where she would have been young adult teen, but I think she was taken fairly early. I think she was very young. It's just that she developed into a troubled student all the same somehow, and that's why she was assigned.
I think a lot of it is also because despite being in it, she was probably one of those girls who had memories of their birth. Like one of those people whose memories go really, really far back. So they actually remember what it was like to be an infant, and she actually remembered her mother. And it's like
that's another thing is she's I might be God, I need to re-research her, but my memory of her is that she doesn't know who her father is or even what his species was, and theorizes it might have been an Anzadi, because of how long-lived she is. But I don't quote me on that, but I think that's, as far as we know, her genetic makeup. So there's also potentially she's a unique hybrid, which is also like a mental thing if you're a kid,
isn't it? Yeah, you're standing out and you're not blending in with anyone else.
And for that reason, she would always be the odd one out within the Jedi Order. It's like she wouldn't really fit in or get along too well with her peers. Like no matter what, she's always going to be like that dark woman. It's like, I don't think she'd go quite as far as the Dark Woman. I don't think you'd have those bits where it's like, oh, you were gone for years. We thought you were dead. It's like, no, I do think that she would probably report back in, but simply because as such a driven, determined individual, she would probably view her connection to the Jedi Order as an asset and a resource that she needs to maintain.
Best place to do the work that she needs to be doing. She's more grounded than Dark Woman.
Yeah. Absolutely agreed, but also I think she would even view those connections as like something she needs to rely on, because without it she'd give over to despair. Like she would need those things to keep going.
Yeah, she would know level for sure.
She would be one of those people who is very disturbed no matter what, but she'd at least understand that she has problems and be working very hard to self-regulate. And part of that would be maintaining her connection. And the impression I also have is that if she wouldn't have many friends, but the friends she did have, she would be attached to.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. She'd be quietly appreciative of all of the bonds she forges, in her early years and maintains. She'd be clinging to them, not like, I don't mean in a clingy, needy way, but she would always appreciate her time with them when she was back at the temple. That would keep her there if nothing else did. For sure.
The loose personality parallel I'm thinking of is someone like Zul Zist. It would be like her personality type, I think. Somebody who is damaged and has their issues, but is still a Jedi. Not particularly healthy, not the healthiest Jedi, not a model Jedi necessarily, but still someone who does their job, is on the light side, is dependable, just a little reckless and damaged. But, in some ways that makes them a more interesting character.
Yeah, and could be
the thing is
a
that
Jedi. I've always said that someone like Anakin, for example, never really fit that description. To an extent,
speaking of
hero,
Anakin,
sure, but as a Jedi, not so much.
Yeah, it's like, speaking of Anakin, Anakin is like, I've come to see Anakin as the Jedi who behaved more like a Sith, and the Sith who behaved more like a Jedi. But just going back to Aurra Singh, because tangent. I also think that she'd be one of those people where, like Matt said, she would not be a model Jedi, but at the same time, she'd be an example of just how necessary the Jedi ideology and philosophy is for some of its members. For some people, it's the only thing that gives them an anchor in life. It's the only thing keeping them on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, she'd have her problems, but she'd by no means be doomed to fail as a Jedi. She could make it work. It just would be a hard road for her. But that's not unique.
Yeah, constant struggle in which she needs to rely on the Jedi way. She needs to rely on her personal bonds that she values so, if quietly, strongly. And she need her work to keep her busy. Keep her focused.
And if we think about like the things she's achieved and the people she's stood up to in her career, she could be quite the badass as well.
Definitely.
I actually think that as like a member of the Jedi Order, provided with access to their resources and their training, she probably would have become a lot more powerful than she was as a bounty hunter. Because as a bounty hunter, the problem is that her Jedi training was effectively aborted at Padawan level, and then she just stacked on all of these other different skills. Whereas as a Jedi, she probably would have become, well, basically female Quinlan Voss.
Yeah,
I can see that.
that's definitely where I play. So you said before somewhere between Quinlan Voss and the Dark Woman, and that's exactly as I'd say. You know, female Quinlan Voss with a few esoteric tricks up her sleeve. Not that Voss himself doesn't have those, of course, but even more so thanks to her mentorship of.
You know, she wouldn't be running around with quite so many concealed knives, but she'd probably have a blade up her sleeve.
Yeah, in the Force as well.
Yeah,
the ability,
and we have seen
is there.
And we have seen, you know, it's not common, but there are still multiple Jedi who have made use of the uncivilized blasters.
yeah, I reckon she'd have one of those in her pocket as well. Yeah, definitely the type.
By the way, Zool did as well. That wasn't why I thought of her though. It was purely a personality type, but she was not afraid to use one. So there's another parallel between them.
It's a great fit.
Yeah.
But yeah, is that? Oh, sorry, Connor.
Well, no, I was just going to trail off on something. Whatever. It happens. I think I have a thought. It's on the tip of my tongue, and then I swallowed it because Jocasta Nu was walking over, and the dark side said, "No, you don't mention Camino. Fuck you."
Because reference.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but yeah, that's us wrapped up then, I guess. Yeah. Any closing thoughts on these? Because I think this is an interesting set of matchups. I like how the kind of detachment from connection to the Force and focus on a more practical level has been prevalent here with all of these characters. You know.
Yeah, and it's been a good mix. You know, and I think it's had more to do with their. I think it has had a lot to do with their personality types, and also their sort of. We've spoken more about, I guess, their flaws this time around than like, you know, the things that, you know, build up their characters, like in our other episodes. So it's been sort of an interesting one from a psychological perspective.
I think that's it. How I mean that the fact that their psychology is more connected to which side of the Force they're on than the other characters we've touched.
Yeah.
Probably because these are more not necessarily damaged in all cases, but they're more through the fact that their flaws are more prevalent in their characters and in their stories. You know, that is affecting their overall core as we shift it from one side to the other.
I agree.
Let us know in the comments below, guys, what you think on the characters that we've discussed in this video here, and let us know what you think, and if we've not covered anything, you know, raise it down below. I am Reti 4, and I still don't have an outro.
Greyjedi 91. For
every time.
we're always on the same frequency. I apologize for that. Anyway, that's me gone. Sorry about that.